Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Latam Stocks Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Flood. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Marcos Paolozzi. Marcos is the Chief Investment Officer at Hieron, a Brazilian family office. He's also an international master of chess and the former Brazilian national champion. So I have a ton of questions for Marcos. I'm going to ask him about his bio in the interview. So let's get right into it. Hi, Marcos. How are you?
Great, Patrick. Thank you for having me here. It's great to talk to our audience. And I hope we can have a nice chat and explore quite a few investment opportunities and ideas.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk to you. So before we get into the investment type stuff, I want to hear more about your background. Where are you from? Where did you go to school? I know you've had a very long career working with a wide variety of assets. So maybe if you can just walk me through how you ended up being the Chief Investment Officer at a family office.
Yes, Patrick, it's a long story. Basically, I was born in São Paulo. São Paulo is Brazil's largest city with about 20 million inhabitants. It's like Brazil's New York City with a lot of diversity, a very entrepreneurial environment. At a very early age, I moved to Santos, which is about 40 miles away. It also happens to be the largest port in Latin America. That's significant because Brazilian immigrants, which had a very important role in Brazil development, used to arrive through the port in Santos. Also, it was a gateway to the world. In terms of sports, Santos also has a very distinguished soccer team, which won the global title for a few times. And had as its major player Pelé, who was equivalent to today's Lionel Messi. So that's where I came from. And you mentioned that I happened to be international chess master. That's a fact. And before that, I also wanted to be a soccer player, like most Brazilian kids. However, at a very early age, I noticed I hadn't the talent or abilities to do that. And so I looked for other endeavors, and that's how I started playing chess.
Great. So specifically then, how did you transition from chess to financial markets? I know in your early life then you spent a lot of time focusing on chess and not investments. Is there anything you learned playing chess or studying chess that led you to a career in financial markets?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Patrick. And well, the first thing to mention about chess is that it's a very good exercise for the intellect. And in terms of what eventually helped me to transition to the financial markets was that I was developing decision-making capabilities. Because in chess, you have to make a move. You want it to be the best move. And also, you have a limited amount of time to make your decision. Okay? So you have to evaluate the situation, taking into account many factors, and then come up with a plan. Also, another aspect is that by playing competitions, I initially started at the local level, then moved up to the state level, then national level, and then international level, and that requires quite a lot of perseverance. It's also tied to long-term goals and commitment, and also requires discipline and resilience. And when you play in international competitions, you are trying to position yourself at very high standards. And I think those factors also apply to the financial markets. There are other factors like studying different aspects of the game, which is also similar to the investment world, which is so broad. There are many different aspects of the financial market. And when I transitioned to the financial markets, of course, I did have to study quite a few disciplines, and I did go to many schools, had a lot of teachers. Specifically, I went many times to the United States. I did invest a lot in those opportunities. I went to the Chicago Board Options Exchange to learn option trading and volatility. I also did study yield curve analysis at the New York Institute of Finance, management at the New York University, among other things. So I was always looking and trying to learn new aspects and integrate them into my understanding of markets in order to develop capabilities that would allow me to make good investments.
So who were some of the other investors that you studied? I remember I saw in one of your interviews about chess that you mentioned one chess player you studied. You said you took almost 2 years to really understand what he was saying in the book. So who were some of the investors that you studied in that depth? And then how would you ultimately define yourself, as an investor today? Are you a volatility trader or a Benjamin Graham value investor? What would you say is your style if you have one?
Yeah, Patrick, I'd say it's a little bit to define because throughout my career, I've studied a lot of different aspects of the markets. So I had many influences. And I think the main thing when you do study from successful investors, the first thing that I tried to do was to understand the concept. I think there is a second step, which is then try to figure out how to adapt the concepts into a different environment. Like Brazil, for most of the time, had a different environment than the one in the United States. Very, very different. Like we had hyperinflation, we had a very strong cyclicality. So in general, some of the concepts put out by well-known investors do not necessarily apply themselves equally here. So, of course, I did study Graham and Dodd. These concepts are valid, and I understand some other successful people have tried to emulate his style. There are many followers here in Brazil. And I'd say that I've learned a lot from different people. I mean, I could mention Ray Dalio, Druckenmiller, Senzel, Howard Marks. And one interesting aspect about Howard Marks, and he came down to Brazil last year, and he told us that he's had 53 years in the financial markets. And in that time span, I mean, he's considered a very successful investor. And he said the reason that he's considered to be successful is that he got 4 things right in those 5 decades, and so.
So what were the 4 things? I have to ask.
Yeah, I think he figured out my interpretation, but the thing is, he did figure out the ways in how to transition his portfolio to different economic environments. And in that respect, I mean, speaking about inflation, I remember that the United States had a very difficult time in the 60s and early 70s. It's not a well-known fact, but when you adjust for inflation, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had a 75% drop from top to bottom. And I mean, that gives you the sense that it's very important to understand about inflation. And here in Brazil, when I did start out, there was a situation here in Brazil where inflation was running over 10% per month.
Right.
Yeah, there was about 200% inflation on a yearly basis. And that has a huge influence on interest rates. And Marxism, especially in credit and interest rates. And I mean, you gotta find out when the valuations are not right for the current market environment. And one important aspect is that analyzing monetary conditions gives you some of the tools to make those good decisions to reposition your portfolio when there is a high risk in those times when economic conditions do change.
So the one other question I wanted to ask you about your background, you mentioned, in chess you have to make a move, right? And you're constantly updating your probabilities of the move. but throughout your career, you've continued to choose to invest in Brazil. And one of the things I hear all the time is, Brazil's only a trade. No one can be successful there long term. It's all cyclical. But you continue to invest in Brazil, and you continue to find opportunities. So why maintain a focus on Brazil for decades when a lot of investors view it as a cyclical trade only?
Well, that's only partially true. I've invested in many countries. Like I mentioned before, I did live in the United States. At one point in time, I was working for a major international bank, and I was responsible for the bank's proprietary trading desk. And we had to position our portfolios in different markets, different regions of the globe. And since the 90s, the world got very integrated. So what happens in the United States has a big influence in Brazil. What happens in China has a big influence in Brazil. It was not like that before. And like in the 1980s, like you mentioned, I have a long career. And one of the interesting aspects of that career is that I was able to experience Black Monday. Black Monday was the day did happen in the 19th of October of 1987. The U.S. stock market dropped over 20% in a single day, and so that gives a lot of perspective. One of the interesting aspects of that time was that the main opportunity that was created on that day was buying among the chaos. And I happened to be on the trading floor of the Brazilian Futures Exchange. In the Brazilian markets, rally 14% off the bottom.
Just a V bottom, right? Just the same day. Yeah.
Yeah, in a matter of a few hours.
So what was that like, though, the energy or the climate then? Was it mostly panic, or were you sitting there in cash to buy?
It was just amazing. It was amazing because at the time, not many people were paying attention to what was happening in the U.S. markets. And I noticed there was a very big imbalance in terms of supply and demand, and position myself on the short side of the market. And the next day, I couldn't even get inside the trading floor building, because of so much excitement. I just couldn't get in. So many crowds, there's so much excitement, worry, and fear about the whole situation.
And you knew before, when you saw the lines in the crowd, you knew something had happened, and you knew you were positioned.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And everybody wanted to sell. But, that brings you another lesson, which is, you got to be focusing on the player's positioning. Like bringing that situation to a particular point in time. Last year, there was huge pessimism with the U.S. stock markets. Most investment banks put out sell recommendations. They were expecting the S&P to drop to about 3,000 points. And that didn't materialize in 2023. Because at some point in time, there was a lot of bearish positioning, and that gives you the opportunity to position yourself on the other side of the trade at some point in time.
So what type sorry, go ahead.
Yes, please, Patrick, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, what type of indicators or analysis are you doing to find those imbalances? Are you looking at technical indicators, RSI? Are you looking at more fundamental type stuff like inflows, outflows? How do you determine if there's an imbalance in the market like you saw in 87?
Yeah. Speaking a little bit about my work, right now, a lot of the work that I'm doing involves analyzing monetary conditions. and their impact on different asset classes. And based on monetary conditions, I've developed a model for the US stock market, which has been very helpful recently, giving a buy and then a sell condition. And by the way, I do publish eventually on LinkedIn some of my trading ideas. I did put out this buying recommendation last year, September and November, and I reversed that recommendation about a month and a half ago. Right now, I see monetary conditions extremely tight. I think that presents a very big risk to financial markets all over the world, including the S&P and the U.S. stocks in general. And as you probably know, there's a big disparity between the S&P or other major U.S. stock market indices, like the Russell 2000. And right now, for instance, I noticed that the Russell 2000 is trading at the lowest level in comparison to the S&P 500 for the past 20 years. So there's a big discount there. I think that's an opportunity that should be monitored. And I think the opportunity is not there yet, but I think it will present itself as long as monetary conditions do relax a bit, which I think might happen within the next 12 months. And speaking of evaluating supply and demand, I've developed a lot of algorithms and indicators. At the beginning, I did use those that are commercially available. But for the past 10 or 15 years, I've been developing my own. And that's been quite helpful as well.
Sure.
And like I said, analyzing monetary conditions right now, I think that's the most important aspect of market evaluation at this point in time. And that is affecting not only the United States, but Brazil and Latam in general as well.
So given the tighter monetary conditions that you're seeing, how do you structure a family office portfolio? How do you allocate for generational type time horizons given today's scenario?
Yeah, very good question, Patrick. Well, the first thing you gotta do is make a deep analysis of the scenario. In our process here at Hieron, we do have a small but very efficient team of financial market professionals. We have a team of 4 portfolio managers in total. And on a combined basis, we have over 100 years of market experience. So our process is following the markets every day. We do hold 2 meetings, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, where we evaluate the major financial indicators and financial and economic conditions. Then, on a monthly basis, we have a 2-day meeting where we work out probabilities of different scenarios evolving. Broadly speaking, we do have the main scenario, which is the most likely one, and then we evaluating probabilities of positive and negative scenarios evolving. One of the things that we do evaluate is whether there is an imbalance of probabilities regarding the positive and negative scenarios. And in a broad sense, that gives you an idea whether the portfolio should be either more or less defensive. We also have projections for the main asset classes. We do follow about 12 main asset classes plus their subdivisions. Mainly they are fixed income or equities. As you are well aware, in the United States, there is a lot of talk about the 60-40 portfolio. Here in Brazil, we have sort of an inverted 640 portfolio. Like the major part is allocated
All
to fixed income. Yeah. And then, like right now, our portfolio is about 65% fixed income.
Okay.
And about 35% between equities and alternatives.
Okay.
But then you gotta find the right balance between which alternative segments you are gonna allocate to. Those being equities, real estate, energy sectors, also multi-strategy funds. In the fixed income space, we do have different types of financial instruments available, and we got to figure out the right amount for each particular one, depending on the direction of inflation and the central bank policy, and also how much duration risk you want to have or not to have.
Are there any cornerstone type assets? So at 35% alternatives and then 65% fixed income, you're still, taking market risk. Are there any type of assets like real estate, where, Brazil's had 8 currencies since World War II? So is there just a portion of the portfolio for a family office that you just leave in gold and never touch? And then the rest is what you do with the fixed income? Or no? Is it all always changing? Is the portfolio always variable?
Very good question. For Brazilian investors, gold means the central bank T-bills.
In the U.S. too, yeah. But it's not exactly.
Yeah, but
it still has counterparty risk.
There's a very big difference between Brazilian T-bills and U.S. T-bills. And the reason being that over time, allocating to U.S. T-bills is a money-losing proposition, meaning you get back inflation or even less than that. Whereas here in Brazil, given the history of high inflation, you get very high real rates of return. Like right now, the rate for Brazilian short-term T-bills is 12 3/4. That's compared to a Fed funds rate close to 5 3/8. So that right out of the gate gives you a 7% advantage for Brazilian T-bills. And historically, Brazilian T-bills have averaged about 3.5% over the inflation rate, whereas at this point in time, you are getting double that amount, which is 7%. Also, one of the main aspects that come out of the situation is that the Brazilian currency has been very strong relative to the US dollar. I think that's a very important fact at this point in time. As you probably know, many countries have been battling their weakening currencies like China and Japan. Japan's currency is the lowest level for the last 30 years. China has been fighting huge outflows, whereas for Brazil, this used to be a huge risk. But right now, at this point in time, Brazilian currency is displaying significant amount of resilience. Or outlook for the Brazilian currency is true.
No, I was going to ask, what do you attribute what do you attribute that resilience to? Is it a function of increased demand as Brazil exports more commodities? Why has the Brazilian real been so strong relative to other global currencies?
Yes, two main factors. You just mentioned the most important one. Brazil's trade balance has been very robust. Agriculture has been growing at about 16% clip relative to 2022. And Brazil's trade surplus is very significant at this point in time. And also the interest rate gap is positive for Brazil, meaning you get better pay to invest here in Brazil than in most of the other countries. And so that keeps the currency depreciation in check as well. I think there are other factors. Yes, please.
No, go ahead. Sorry. There's a little delay.
Yes. I think there are other main factors and I think there is another forward-looking aspect regarding that resilience, which I think Brazil is poised for a big change relative to the prior couple of decades. Like Brazil had a huge foreign currency problem in the 1980s, coming out of the 1970s recession. What happened was that Brazil had a very large external debt that was floating rate. So when inflation went up in the US and the Fed with Paul Volcker started fighting inflation, Brazil suffered a lot. However, beginning in around 2002, we had a situation where demand for commodities was improving, mainly out of China demand and China's growing relevance in the international sector. And so Brazil did build very large FX reserves at this point in time, standing at around $340 billion. So that provides a cushion and lowers volatility. That in turn provides for a more stable macro environment.
So in spite of all the trade surplus and the stronger currency and the solid international reserve position, we still haven't necessarily seen huge foreign inflows into Brazil. And the equity market is that's an important aspect, the international investor. Do you think that's just a function of tighter monetary conditions globally? So would you expect to see more foreign inflows into Brazil when conditions eventually loosen?
Foreign inflows are very important for Brazil. And foreign share of trading at the São Paulo Stock Exchange is over 50%. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Flows have been very minor this year. They're positive.
Not as positive as the news, though, right? It's been the real rates are high, the currency's strong, agriculture exports are up, but the international investor just doesn't seem to care.
Exactly. And Brazilian investors don't care as well.
Why not?
Because
they'll sit in Selic and they're happy to take their 12.75 and
exactly.
Yeah.
Clients will ask, why not just sit there and place as much as we can in Brazilian gold, which is like I mentioned before, is the Brazilian Selic.
Yeah.
So we will have a big discount in valuations. And part of the reason of that disparity in valuations relative to the US market, like the S&P 500 is trading at about 18 times forecast earnings, whereas Brazilian market trades at 8 times forecast earnings. And of course, that has a lot to do with the level of Brazilian interest rates. But also there's another aspect, which I think US portfolios are probably too much weighted towards US assets. There's probably a good reason for that, because US assets are very high quality assets. They have had very high returns over the prior decades, and that's quite significant. However, when you look at the situation at this point in time, you notice that the US represents about 1/3 of the global economy, whereas the market capitalization of US assets equates to 2/3 of the global market capitalization. and I think there is a possibility that might change, of course, over time. And by that I mean a very, very long time, meaning a few decades. But the fact is that the Brazilian economy is so much smaller than the US economy. And if you get a change of direction of inflows, you could have a very good repricing favoring Brazilian assets. Of course, that depends on a lot of economic and financial fundamentals, but I think we have a position at this point in time to be able to make a bullish case for Brazilian assets over the next few years, based on the lower volatility of Brazilian inflation, higher growth rate than the US economy, and that's a very important factor. For the last 10 years, Brazil had a very poor growth rate, much lower than the US, but that's about to change.
Why? What makes you think Brazil is going to continue to grow faster than the US? Is it continued agriculture growth? What parts of the Brazilian economy, more specifically, are you most excited about?
Yeah, the first thing to say about that is that Brazilian growth is not going to be huge. We are talking about sub 2% growth, maybe close to 2%. However, the Brazilian economy was growing nothing for the past 10 years. We call it the lost decade, which was one of the lost decades, by the way. Brazil had quite a few of those in modern times. However, at the same time, the US economy was growing over 3%, whereas right now we have the prospects, according to our projections, of the Brazilian economy growing close to 2%, whereas the US economy might grow closer to 1.7, 1.8%. So that's not a huge difference, but that's a big change relative to what we had in the past. Also, Brazilian inflation, which has been Brazil's major economic problem over the last few decades, has come down relative to developed countries' inflation. Brazil used to have inflation at a spread of about 2.3% higher than US inflation. This has come down to about 1% right now, and we do believe this is gonna hold going forward. So we have three main factors underpinning our bullish macro call for Brazil: higher growth rates, both nominally and on a relative basis. Also, lower inflation relative to developed countries. And another important factor is that there's a lot of financial market deepening in Brazil. Brazil has been one of the main players in the digitalization of finance. The Brazilian Central Bank created a program called PIX, which allows Brazilian individuals to make instant payments. And since the start of this program, 70 million Brazilians who did not have access to banking now are integrating into the financial system. There are other developments that are going to be coming out on top of that. And that has led, among other factors, in growth in different segments of the Brazilian financial markets, allowing credit to flow to companies and enterprises, which is a very positive factor going forward. So also very, in a sense, is a game changer.
So I want to transition a little. I want to ask you about private markets in Brazil. I imagine that private equity and venture capital fit into your alternatives basket. So how are you thinking about private equity and venture capital in Brazil at the moment? I know those are two industries globally that have got hit as hard as any by the tighter financial conditions. The venture capital funding in Brazil is a straight down and to the right. So are you seeing opportunities? Is it somewhere you're looking to allocate? Is that another way you might play your bullish macro call on Brazil, or no?
Sure. There are many opportunities, not only in private equity, but also in private credit. Credit in Brazil is a growth area, meaning there is a lot of disintermediation happening. Huge opportunity there. We also see lots of opportunities in real estate, infrastructure as well, energy projects, and we do invest in those segments as well. Those are two of our main specialties, by the way, real estate and infrastructure.
Do you do that in-house or do you outsource to managers?
For those two areas in particular, we do that in-house.
Okay.
But because those are specialties of ours, that doesn't mean that we do not buy other managers' financial products. We do. And we have a broad range of fund managers that we partner with.
So I'm curious then, in real estate in Brazil, are you seeing opportunities in residential, commercial, both? Because I know commercial real estate in the U.S. is a hot topic. With a lot of the offices, no one went back to the office. Leases are starting to come due. There's a lot of bears on commercial real estate in the U.S. Are you seeing the same thing in Brazil, or are you seeing opportunities?
We do see a lot of opportunities. Here in Brazil, we don't like as much the office sector. The situation is a bit different than in the US because most of the people did return to the office. However, we do also have high vacancy rates. So we do see a lot of opportunity in logistics and in the industrial sector. Vacancy rates are at historically low levels because of high demand. There is a lot of upgrading taking place. And also we see demand coming out of the growing importance of e-commerce.
So logistics, like Amazon warehousing maybe, or a theme like that might be interesting.
Exactly.
In Brazil still. Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Amazon is a player. Amazon got out of the market about a year ago, but is now looking to return. I guess Amazon did return about 42 properties about a year ago, but they are reevaluating, and we also got inquiries about some of our projects.
Sure.
We also like residential. Residential, Brazil has 5 million deficit in terms of family homes. So this is a long-term opportunity in the residential space as well.
Do you see opportunities across the economic spectrum? So do you see it as low-income housing, middle class, and upper class, or is there a particular type of housing you're seeing as more attractive?
Exactly. All of those, higher income has access to credit and has better financial conditions to be able to afford homes. The Brazilian government has a program that incentivizes the building and buying of homes for the lower income classes. So that's a positive factor as well. Brazilian president has a goal of delivering about 2 million new homes until the end of his mandate in 2026. So that's a significant factor of demand.
it's hard, right? I think Brazil's mortgage rates are very low relative to the rest of the world. I think it's something like 10% of Brazil finance their houses with mortgages, right? Because at 12.75%, it's a very expensive mortgage. So is there any way around that, or no? It's just Brazil has expensive credit, so mortgages are expensive, and it slows the market growth.
Yeah, that's the main factor that detracts from the market. But like I said, we see lower rates going forward, so there's going to be improvements. Rates are going to probably coming down to single digits, and that is going to increase affordability. Also, there are new financing mechanisms, and like I mentioned before, the Brazilian government also incentivizes the affordability. So that's a Polish factor as well.
So it's improving. It's becoming more accessible.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
Marcos, I'm almost out of questions, but there's one more I thought to ask you that I'm curious about, circling back to the equity markets in general. Brazil is still a heavily commodity-dependent economy. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but can the Brazilian equity market have a bull market if commodities are not in a bull market? So can we see a commodity stagnation or downturn in commodity prices and still see an equity bull market in Brazil?
Yeah, commodities are a big factor. Big factor because of their importance to exports, and that in turn relates to the currency value, that in turn relates to the level of interest rates. So definitely commodities are an important factor. And depending on the outlook for the international economy, that can play out in favor of Brazil or not necessarily so. We do think there's going to be good demand for commodities over the next few years. We do not forecast that a bull market would develop. But the current price level is a positive level for Brazil. And I'd say that international monetary conditions are the most important right now for the Brazilian stock market to be able to stage a bull market. Right now, other sectors like retail are in a dire situation because of high interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite challenging, and we do not forecast a big improvement over the next few months. However, thinking longer term, we do think there's good potential for improvements. And again, valuations are very low. Pricing of mid and small companies relative to commodities companies is at multi-year lows. So there's a big discount. So we have a favorable entry level. What we have to monitor right now is the right moment when both the international macro factors and the domestic factors will fall into place to have a buying signal.
Yeah, I saw a great chart someone posted the other day of the small cap index relative to the Bovespa, and it's the lowest level in 12, 13 years, which shows you how cheap it is. And
exactly.
It's hated.
Exactly.
So it's interesting. Marcos, this was an amazing conversation. Yeah. I'm very grateful to you for coming on. Before I get you out of here, is there any way people can follow your work? You mentioned your LinkedIn, which I'll post in the show notes. Is there any other message you want to leave, or any way people can get in touch with you if they want to follow your work?
Just to say to your audience that it's been a pleasure for me to take part in your podcast. I do wish you many successful episodes. And if any of your guests would like to send me a message through LinkedIn, I will be more than happy to answer and establish contact.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcos. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Patrick. My pleasure.